5 Minutes of Fear, a collection of suspense stories by Shebin Koshy. Each story takes 5 minutes to read, and each one ends with a twist you won't see coming. Story number 1, The New Neighbor. Clara Whitmore first noticed it on a Tuesday. The moving truck had shown up at the house across Belham Street. 3 days before, she had watched from behind her kitchen curtain as boxes were carried inside. She hadn't seen the new neighbor's face, just movers in gray work clothes, and she told herself she didn't care. She told herself a lot of things these days, that the grief would fade, that the silence in the house would stop pressing against her like a living thing, that Marcus had been dead for 14 months and she needed to stop counting. Then, on Tuesday morning, she saw the man jog past her window at 6:15 a.m. Marcus had jogged at 6:15 a.m. every single morning, rain, sleet, or burning heat in the Belham summers. Always at 6:15, Clara set down her coffee. It was just a chance match. Of course it was. People jogged in the morning. That was a normal thing normal people did. By Thursday, the matching details had piled up. The new neighbor, she still hadn't seen his face clearly, knelt in his front garden at 4 p.m. That was the same hour Marcus had always worked on his rose beds. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and kept his back to her house, as if he knew she was watching. He dug with his left hand. Marcus had been left-handed. On Friday evening, she heard whistling. Not just any tune. It was Clair de Lune, the same piece Marcus used to whistle while grilling on the back patio. The same 3 bars over and over, slightly off-key in the exact places Marcus had always gone flat. Clara's hands shook as she gripped the edge of her kitchen sink. Grief did strange things to the mind. She knew that. Dr. Finn had told her so during their sessions, that the brain looks for patterns that it rebuilds. The dead in the faces of strangers because it cannot accept loss. But this wasn't a pattern. This was a copy. She began writing things down. She kept a notebook, logging times and actions. The morning jog at 6:15. The gardening at 4 p.m. The whistling at 7 p.m. The porch light switched off at exactly 10:30, the same time. Marcus had always locked up. She wrote it all down with the care of someone trying to prove she wasn't losing her mind. On Saturday, she decided to introduce herself. She baked a loaf of banana bread, Marcus's recipe because it was the only one she knew by heart, and walked across the street. Her pulse was thick in her throat. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighbor's lawn. The garden beds were freshly turned. She smelled soil, and something faintly sharp like new paint. She knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. She looked through the small window beside the door. The inside was border, moving boxes still stacked against the walls. A single chair facing the window. Her window, she realized with a cold jolt. The chair faced straight toward her house. Clara stepped back. The banana bread felt heavy in her hands. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and creak. At 11 p.m., she went to the window. The neighbor's house was dark, except for a single light in the upstairs bedroom. A shadow moved behind the curtain. Back and forth, pacing. Marcus used to pace when he was worried. Back and forth 5 steps, each way, like a man counting the walls of a cell. She had to know. Monday morning, she set her alarm for 5:45 a.m. and waited by the living room window. At 6:14, the neighbor's front door opened. She pressed her face to the glass. He stepped into the pale morning light, and Clara's breath left her body. The jaw, the slope of the shoulders, the way he tugged at his left earlobe before stretching, a habit so specific, so personal that no stranger could copy it. He turned slightly, and she saw his side profile. It was Marcus, older, thinner, a beard he'd never worn before, and his hair was darker. Probably died. But it was him. The man she'd buried, or thought she'd buried, 14 months ago. The man whose closed casket she'd wept over. The man whose death papers listed accidental drowning in Lake Moro. Clara sank to the floor. The room tilted. She pressed her palms flat against the hardwood and forced herself to breathe. In, out, in, out. He was alive. Her husband was alive. He had faked his death and moved. And across the street. The thinking part of her mind screamed that this made no sense. Why come back? Why here? Why copy the exact habits she would know? Unless he wanted her to find out. She spent the day in a fog of anger and confusion. By evening, she had a plan. She would face him. She would walk across that street, pound on his door, and demand answers. At 9 p.m., she marched across Belham Street. The air was cool and smelled of cut grass. She didn't bother knocking. The back door was unlocked. Marcus had never locked back doors, a habit that used to drive her mad, and she stepped inside. The house was dim. She moved through the kitchen, past the stacked boxes, into the living room with its single chair. And there, sitting in the half-dark, was Marcus. He looked up at her. His eyes were red. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. "You figured it out," he said. His voice. God, his voice. The same low rasp. "You're alive." Her words came out flat. "Dead. You let me grieve. You let me bury an empty box." It wasn't empty. He swallowed hard. There was a body. A man who looked enough like me. "I'm not proud of it, Clara." "Why?" He stood, moved to the window, and looked through the blinds. She noticed his hands were shaking. "Because someone was going to kill me. And if I stayed dead, they'd stop looking." He turned to face her. But they didn't stop. They found me and Karsten. They found me in Dunmore. So I came back to the only place I thought they'd never look. Across the street from my own widow. Who's trying to kill you?" He opened his mouth. Then his eyes shifted, not to her but past her, toward the kitchen, toward the back door she'd left open. His face went white. "Clara," he whispered, "did you tell anyone you were coming here?" "No." "Did anyone follow you?" She turned. The kitchen was empty. The back door stood open, and beyond it, the dark yard stretched toward the tree line. Then she saw it. A small red light. Steady, not blinking. In the bushes at the edge of the yard. The kind of light that belonged to a camera. Or a gun sight. Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her to the floor. The window above. Then broke apart. Glass rained down like teeth. "Stay down," he hissed. Clara's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her eyes. She pressed herself against the floor and understood, finally, the shape of the truth. The danger had never been the neighbor. The danger had never been Marcus. It was whoever had been watching both of them, patient, silent, waiting for the dead man to show himself so they could finish what they'd started. And Clara, by crossing the street, had just proved he was alive. Another shot. The wall above them cracked open. Marcus pulled her toward the hallway, toward the basement door. "I'm sorry," he said as they went down into the dark. "I'm sorry for all of it." She grabbed his hand. It was warm, real, alive. Above them, the front door crashed open. That was the new neighbor. From the book, 5 Minutes of Fear by Shebin Koshy. Next time, Seat 14C. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if this story kept you up, leave a like. It helps others find these stories in the dark.